Great, so let's go ahead and get started. Hello and welcome again to today's ArtsU Intensive, Digital Marketing for Artists. My name is Marissa Shadburn. I'm the Field Education Coordinator with Americans for the Arts, and I'm excited to get started with our great program today. But first, let's do a quick tour of our virtual platform. Please note that today's presentation is being recorded, and the recording will be available in 1 to 2 business days on the event page where you registered for today's activity. You will receive an email when the recording is ready to be viewed. An automated live transcript is available for viewing if you wish. To turn it on or off, please press the CC or closed caption button at the bottom of your screen and then select Show or Hide Subtitle. We will post this transcript and other resources for today's activity on the Resources tab of the event page. I will put that link in the chat for you momentarily. For today's workshop, we invite you to participate as you are able. You can submit your questions, comments, or introduce yourself using the chat feature located at the bottom of your screen. To ask a question live, please open the reactions feature at the bottom of your screen and then press raise hand. That will notify us that you have a question. You can turn your microphone on and join us on camera by pressing the mute or unmute and stop and start video buttons at the bottom left corner of your screen. Should you need any assistance today, please send me, Marissa at AFTA, a direct message in the chat. You can do this by opening the chat, selecting the To field, and then searching or scrolling for Marissa at AFTA. And with that, it's my great pleasure to introduce Adam Schwerner, the chairperson of the City of Laguna Beach Arts Commission. Good morning, Adam.
Good morning, Marissa. Good morning, everybody. Very excited to be part of this conversation. And you know, what's most exciting for myself and my fellow arts commissioners is that this morning, we are doing and presenting this presentation with our partners, the Art Affair Festival, Festival of the Arts, the Sawdust Festival, and the Americans for the Arts Group. And it's really wonderful to coordinate and collaborate on these kinds of things. And of course, we're very excited to have both Ceci and Drew with us. You know, none of this would be happening today without funding from the lodging establishments of Laguna Beach, and of course, the City of Laguna Beach, and both Sean Poschel, our cultural arts manager, and Michael McGregor, our arts program coordinator, who have helped make this thing happen. We're very excited to have Marissa helping us coordinate. And Ceci, you know, when I was reading part of what's on your website, I became very excited to talk with you today because one, you have a huge affinity for Bach, and on top of it, you love Star Trek. So that was exciting. And Drew, I'm very excited to hear how you think that during these very challenging times, it's required of us that we lean in because these are really good times to grow. So with that, thank you so much. And Marissa, I think you'll do the introduction.
Thank you so much for joining us this morning, Adam.
Thank you.
So with that, it's my great pleasure to pass things off to our 2 presenters today, Ceci Dadisman and Drew McManus. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. And Adam, both Drew and I are intense Star Trek fans.
I was going to say.
There will be some Star Trek references in the slide deck. There always are when we present.
Fantastic.
And I have all of my different action figures and everything right here at the ready in case one needs to come on camera.
Love it.
Give me 1 second. I'm going to share my screen so that we can, can everyone see my screen now?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, great. Good morning, and thank you so much for being here with us today. We are going to have a really great and dynamic workshop today. Like Marissa mentioned, we would love it for it to be very interactive. We've got a good number of people in the workshop today, and we'll have plenty of opportunities for Q&A, for discussion, for little activities. Both Drew and I will be monitoring the chat throughout. So if you have a question at any point in time, no matter who's speaking, feel free to put it in the chat. If it needs to be addressed right at that moment, then, we'll interject to make sure that, we're not moving too fast for anyone. But please know that we do have some Q&A sections sort of identified within the run of show, as Marissa says, for today. So we like to be really sort of, casual and, just kind of regular on these workshops. So please feel free to interject, feel free to be yourself, ask any questions that you have. This is a safe space. There are no stupid questions. If you have a question, odds are someone else has that same question, and we're always happy to answer it. So I will introduce myself a little bit further, and then Drew will introduce himself, and then we will sort of get going. My name is Ceci Dadisman, and I'm an arts marketer. I've been working with artists and arts organizations for about 17 or 18 years now. I've worked with everyone from individual artists, like many of yourselves, to arts organizations of all sizes and all disciplines. I tend to specialize a little bit on the digital marketing side, but I am absolutely pro sort of holistic campaigns. Traditional marketing is a really important part of your marketing mix. As we mentioned, I'm a huge Star Trek fan. I have my little avatar here. This is me if I was a really cool like Trill with my tricorder and everything. So with that, and here is my contact information. So if at any time you want to communicate with me after this, if you have a specific question, please feel free to do that. We'll make sure to that you receive this contact information afterwards as well. Drew.
Hi, everybody. Boy, I kind of feel like I'm on the other end of the spectrum, because I just realized as Ceci was giving her length of time in the field, this year marks 30 years for me that I've been working with all of this. And I come at this from really two different angles, where Ceci is all about digital marketing and is the guru with that. I'm much more of the nuts and bolts kind of person. And we'll be talking about a lot of nuts and bolts things regarding your website, analytics, e-commerce. But before I started working in technology, I have spent the bulk of my career running a completely separate business, which focuses on artistic planning, strategic planning, board development, executive development for performing arts organizations. So everything that I do in technology comes at it from that perspective, how specifically all of this has to work for arts organizations and individual artists. And we all know there's enough unique needs within that group that it's one thing to give you information, it's another thing to frame it in a way that makes sense for how you need to actually apply it. And that's what we'll be focusing on today. And normally when we give these sessions, there is going to be jargon. You've had that warning already, but if it's live, I usually introduce Jeffrey, which is the jargon giraffe. And I ask people to, raise their hand with Jeffrey if they have a question. Fortunately, we can't do that here. But we do have the ability to raise your hand, which Ceci and I will both be keeping our eyes on as best as we can, so that if anyone does have a question in mid-presentation, go right ahead and throw it out there. I think we've got a real reasonable number of people to work with today. That shouldn't be too bad. And as Ceci pointed out, here's all of my contact information. This will be available for you as well. After the session is done, you can feel free to reach out with questions. I can't do a 3-month consulting job free of charge, but I can absolutely answer specific questions about your specific situation with all the topics we're talking about today. I also wanted to point out a couple of other resources where you can grab a lot of the information we're talking about. Artshacker.com in particular is a great one. That's one that Ceci and I actually started together several years back that really is like a life hacker for arts administrators, where a lot of what we're talking about, you'll find more in-depth articles. And it's been up and running for about 3 years now. So there's a good bit of content that's there. Arts Admin Jobs is also just exactly what it sounds like. It's a jobs board specifically for arts admin positions, but unlike a lot of the other options that are out there, this is entirely free for both job seekers and employers. This is something that I just put out as a free service for everybody. And then adaptistration.com is my blog that I've been writing since 2003 that focuses on orchestra management. So if that's your thing, that's going to be your blog. But otherwise, I think Ceci's going to be starting things off here for us today.
Yep. So let's get into the meat of what we're going to be talking about today. And you've heard thus far, both Drew and I, arts organizations versus individual artists. So everything that we talk about here today are going to be applicable whether you are here for or whether you are representing an arts organization. All of this is really going to be the same sort of conceptually. These concepts are going to apply for both cases. We are framing this a little bit more towards the individual artist side, but the fundamentals are still the same. So we're going to start out here with a poll that I'm going to launch momentarily. We'd love to know how many folks on the workshop today have taken any sort of course or attended a workshop like this before about digital marketing. This just helps us to sort of gauge, level of familiarity with what we're going to talk about. So I'll give it just a second. Oh, good, it's working. I see everyone voting. Fantastic.
It's fun from the admin side because it's like watching a horse race. You see which side gets to change in real time.
Okay, they're still coming in. So, well, I mean, it's a little bit half and half, but slightly more people have taken a course before, so that's great. So a lot of you will have a little bit of knowledge about what we're going to talk about already. Hopefully we can build upon that. Before we get started in earnest, please know that we're going to talk about a lot of stuff today. We're going to go over a lot of things. And please don't feel that we would expect you to implement every single thing that we are going to talk about today in the short term, right? It's not possible for anyone to do that, right? The goal here is that you will be able to find, at least 1, 2, maybe 3 things that you can pull out and implement in the short term. Maybe other things might be, sort of a longer term goal. But, if you start to feel overwhelmed, please know that it's not the expectation that that you take all of these things that we're going to talk about and put them into practice immediately. Okay, excellent. We are going to, let me share the results. There we go. So we had 59% have taken a workshop before, 41% not. So that's great. Okay, the first thing that we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk about sort of marketing and communications framework, basic communications fundamentals, principles. And as I mentioned before, this really is the same whether you are doing marketing for yourself, for a small arts organization, for a big arts organization, or for a for-profit corporation. These basic marketing principles are really going to apply no matter what it is. All right, so let's start with this concept that I like to talk about called your communications ecosystem. So when we're putting communications out into the world, right, we're using lots of different channels to do that. And you can see in this very sophisticated graphic that I have up on the screen that there are some different channels here. When you're communicating about what you do, you are probably putting those communications out on, via email, on a website, maybe on Facebook or Instagram, maybe through personal contact with people. Personal contact is an extremely powerful and absolutely valid communications channel. You might also be doing some sort of traditional channels, maybe through direct mail or printed flyers or postcards or leave behinds. All of these things are your vehicles to get your messaging out to your target audience. And everybody's communications ecosystem might be slightly different depending on what works better or not as well for you and for who you're communicating with and what you are communicating about. Throughout the morning today, it's afternoon where I am, throughout the morning today, we are going to talk a lot about channels. And by the end, hopefully you will kind of have your ecosystem identified so that you can create a very clear plan for all of your different channels and all of your different communications that you're sending out. I want to actually, before I move on to this, I want to sort of make a brief statement about the terminology, marketing versus communication. I don't, especially in the arts and nonprofits, I don't super love the term marketing. I prefer the term communications because what we are doing is exactly that, right? We are communicating with people, whether that communication is for a fundraising purpose, for an event attendance purpose, for an e-commerce purpose, maybe you want somebody to purchase a piece of your work. We're all communicating and it all comes from the same place, and all these principles still apply. I feel like when we use the term marketing a lot, that tends to get siloed really easily right over here, when really let's look at it from a little bit of a higher level in terms of, when we're delivering our message to our audience, that's a communication. That's what we're talking about here today. So I want to start to talk about this concept of relevance. Relevance is really, at a very simple, basic way, the key to a successful communications campaign. If the messaging, if the message, if the communication, if the words that you are sharing are relevant to the recipient, they're probably going to respond to that communication, right? If what you're saying is not relevant, then they're probably going to tune you out, right? And I'm sure that as I'm talking, you might be able to think in your own life about communications that maybe you have received that aren't relevant to you. If you receive an email from a retailer and right from the subject line, you know that it's not relevant to you at all, what's the first thing that you do probably before you even open that email? You probably delete it, right? You don't even consume that communication because you know it's not relevant. Relevance is going to drive that response to the communication, and that's what we want. We want people to engage with our communications, and there's a number of ways that you can engage, and we'll sort of get into that deeper, but we want engagement at a very basic level. Using the email example, that engagement could be opening an email. It could be clicking on the link in an email, right? But at the basic level, you want people to engage with your communication. And then that response or engagement is what's going to drive what, jargon alert, conversions, right? So for us, a conversion is going to be the outcome that we want people to take. Sometimes this outcome can be revenue-based. If you're selling something, trying to get somebody to buy something, sometimes the outcome, maybe it isn't revenue-based. Maybe it's somebody attending an event or an opening or signing up to volunteer or whatever that might be. This quote here I really love. This quote is not mine. This quote is from my dear friend Lee Gallagher, who literally wrote the book on something called precision marketing, which is basically what we're talking about here today. If you're kind of like nerdy like I am and you're real interested in this kind of thing, you can get his book on Amazon. It's really great. But this really distills down this concept of, that we must have relevance in our communication so that people will engage with them. And now you may be saying, okay, well, how do we achieve relevance? This is how we achieve relevance. So for every communication, and I talk about this all the time, but even I have this printed out and right near my desk so that I can see it all the time to remind myself. This is the formula for relevance. When we deliver the right message to the right person at the right time on the right channel, that is going to be the recipe for a relevant communication. So when we have all of these things together, all of this working together, then our communication has a much higher chance of achieving that outcome, or at the very least, getting an engagement. Now, when we think about messaging and sort of the people that we're trying to reach and the channels, we'll get into all of those things a little bit later, but this is the basic sort of framework. This is what we want to try to achieve with every single communication that we send out. Is everyone still with me? I love that everyone so many people have their cameras on. Thank you so much. Everyone's still there? Yay, okay. Hi. All right. So when we talk about relevance, how do we deliver these relevant communications, right? We deliver them through storytelling. And I know that's kind of like a buzzword, this, storytelling, let's create a narrative and all this stuff, but it's really true. And the great thing about the arts, whether you are, attending as an individual artist or on behalf of an arts organization, we have so many amazing stories to tell. We have that luxury. We have it easy. Many big brands, like if you're trying to sell a car or a pair of shoes or, something like that, those brands have to make up a story. They have to create a story to tell around whatever object they're trying to sell to you, right? We have stories built in to what we do. So it's a matter of digging in and identifying what stories are going to be the most relevant to the people we're communicating with. And you'll notice on this slide, I have current and potential audiences, right? Because I know that everyone here probably has their group of people that you communicate with, that know you, that maybe have interacted with you before. But then there's also this group of people that, don't know you yet that you're trying to reach. I'd be willing to bet that that's one of the reasons why you're here, right? You want to expand that group of people that you're interacting with so that you can share what you do with more people. All right. I like data and charts because I'm a visual learner. So I have some data and charts. So I love this report called the Culture Track report. It is more, it's a little bit more geared towards, I guess, arts organizations, but I think you'll really like it. If you have not ever seen the Culture Track report, you can just go to culturetrack.com and download it. And what it is, it comes out every 3 years or so, 3 or 4 years. And it's essentially survey results about people's feelings around arts and culture, right? Why they would participate in it, why they would, go to see a show, what would prevent them from, participating in the arts, all kinds of different things. You'll find a lot of really great insights in this report. Oh, it's totally free to download. You do have to give them your email address, but trust me, they don't spam you. It's put out by a firm called LaPlaca Cohen. And it's really super great. Very, very insightful. But so I've pulled, thank you, Drew, I see in the chat. Drew put it in the chat. I have some key data points here that I think are really great and that I wanted to share with you today to kind of get us started. So this first one is what are your motivators for participation in a cultural event? And I think for this group, I think it's important to note that things like arts festivals, street festivals, these kinds of things. These are things that are identified as cultural events by the respondents in this survey. And if you download the Culture Track report, you'll see all of the different variations there. So this is super applicable. The number one motivator, I love this stat so much. The number one motivator is having fun. What people said would motivate them to participate in some sort of cultural event or interaction is having fun. And that means, is the experience fun, right? Not necessarily is, what on the stage is fun, or is the actual art itself fun. It's that, is the experience fun. And I think that that's so insightful. When we tend to think about fun in terms of arts and culture, I'm a musician by trade, or I used to be a musician. I used to sing opera a lifetime ago. Working like in the opera zone, we think, oh, well, this opera is a comedy. So what's on the stage? Oh yeah, that's super fun. It's super hilarious. But is the actual experience for the audience fun? This is this slightly different perspective that I think is so interesting. Of course, you can see the other, close behind is interest in the content, experiencing new things, right? All of these things, right? All very good things. So let's kind of keep in mind what motivates the people that we're trying to reach to participate in the arts, rather than what we feel is important about the arts. It's a little bit of a shift of how we kind of usually think about it. So we just talked about a motivator. Let's talk about a barrier. Because as communicators, when we are communicating, it is our job to remove barriers to participation. Right? Most barriers to participation in what we do, especially when it comes to the arts, are communications based. And this stat, my gosh, when this culture track came out, I'm like, this is it. This is what we've been talking about for years, man. And here it is in print. The number one barrier to cultural participation is it's not for someone like me. Now, how does someone get that idea in their head, right? It's a result of how we communicate about that particular thing, right? If the communication about a particular event or art form is not relevant, is not using terminology or messages that are easily understood by the recipient, then of course, oh, that must not be for me, right? Think about if someone was talking to you and using very, very, very technical language, right? That's in a discipline that you're not well versed in, right? Your first reaction is probably like, oh, wait a minute. Okay, I don't understand what's going on here. I can't see myself in this. This must not be my thing. This must not be for me, right? Simply changing how we communicate about what we do is very, very powerful. And the best thing is that we have complete control over how we communicate about what we do. We have complete control over the wording that we use, the messaging that we use, the terminology that we use, what stories we tell, right? So another thing that we have it easy, right? We can control the message that we, put out there. Okay, I have a couple more pretty graphics from this particular report here because I think they're important and relevant to the topic of communication today. They did a special culture track just recently because obviously COVID is an unusual time, right? And I promise that's the only time I will use the phrase unusual time, and I will try to avoid the phrases in times like these and all of those other ones that you hear so often lately. But for these two slides, what they found essentially is that people are seeking out. Thank you, Drew. See, Drew's got my back. He just put it in the chat, put the link. people are seeking out creative activities, right? And I'm sure that some of you may have seen this, if you provide classes online or do any sort of streaming, you may have already experienced this, right? But, there is data that shows that because people are unable to gather and go out, people are turning to more creative endeavors, which is a great place for us to be, right? Because we can share what we do, we can create experiences for people related to this, even during this very unusual and trying time. All right, one more. The digital side of the arts, as I'm sure you've seen, has really been accelerated, right? The arts, I don't know if you know this, but in terms of like communications and digital, the arts tend to lag behind a little bit. And I say that lovingly because I'm an arts marketer, right? This is my life, but we tend to lag behind a little bit. But because of COVID and we haven't been able to do things in person, it has served as this huge accelerator into digital content. And people are showing that they want to, and they will participate in digital arts experiences. Right at the beginning of when everything shut down, I was working with a museum, and literally they sold out every single one of their online kids art classes. They sent one email, and within 30 minutes of that email going out, every single one of those classes was sold out. I couldn't even get my kids into a class, and I was handling marketing for them. So people are showing that the digital space is a valid way to participate in the arts. And the great thing too about it is that a lot of, as many of you may have seen, a lot of digital offerings can be free or very low cost to produce from the artist side. Okay, that was a lot of stuff. That was a lot of sort of framework, basic stuff. We're actually running a little bit ahead, so I'm going to take a slight break and just ask if anyone has any questions so far, any thoughts or feelings, any Star Trek anecdotes, anything that you want to share. If not, it's okay, but I just want to take a breather. We do have a little bit of a schedule today, but we'll kind of be a little flexible with it. And you can also, if you don't want to unmute yourself to ask a question, please feel free to put it in the chat. Marissa's monitoring the chat, so is Drew. When Drew does his section, then I'll monitor the chat as well. So we're good. Raise hands.
I just have,
yeah.
Ceci, I'll have one question.
Go ahead.
You talked a little bit earlier about people feeling like they're welcomed, that it's not for them. Will you be talking a little bit more about sort of focusing in on that all a little bit later?
Yep, we're going to talk a bunch about that right now in terms of, in how we create messaging to remove that barrier. Thank you for bringing that up again, because TBH, that's one of my favorite things to talk about is, the barriers that are created for participation and engagement with the arts. And most of those barriers we create unknowingly, right? We're certainly not doing it intentionally, but through how we communicate, and sometimes, some aspects of the experience itself, which are sort of, not as easily dealt with, we create these barriers ourselves, but we can also remove them.
Right. I mean, I think clearly it's a big topic related to inclusiveness and diverse audiences, all of that. So I'm very interested to hear more about that as we go forward today.
Yes, and actually you bring up a really good point specifically about audience diversification. And, if you're thinking about, if anyone here is thinking about sort of ADEI themes, all of what we're talking about here is applicable through that lens as well, right? Because especially with the arts, we have such an opportunity really to reach new people of all backgrounds, right? And taking these concepts about relevance and speaking in a way that's easily understood, no matter whether that's through a, an ADEI lens, or simply talking to your existing sort of patrons or cohort group. The fundamental concepts are totally, they really are the same. The methods might be slightly different, right? The messaging might be slightly different, but that fundamental principle, it still is there.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Ceci, we do have a question. Can you define ADEI?
Oh, yes. So accessibility, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Yeah,
Great.
so thank you for the jargon giraffe there. That was a big one right off the bat. Yep. Okay, so I'm gonna move ahead here. I'm gonna go into my next little section, and I promise I'm gonna say a lot of words at you, but eventually you will have a reprieve from hearing me talk, and you will listen to the dulcet tones of Drew McManus very soon. But I have one more little section here, and then we'll do a Q&A. All right, so let's talk about how we create messaging. One of the first elements of relevance, right, is right person. That's one of those 4 things. We have to reach the right person. Now, who is that person for you? This is a really basic, one of the first questions to answer for yourself or your organization. Who are the people that you're trying to reach? You're going to have multiple sort of groups of people. In marketing, we call those segments. Multiple groups of people that you're trying to reach, and they may need to have slightly different messaging, right? If you are talking about your work or an upcoming opening, let's say to an artist friend of yours, you're going to use specific language, right? Because they already have a level of knowledge about what this is. Well, they probably know what an opening is, an art opening is, right? If you are trying to get your next door neighbor to come to this opening who is not really involved in the arts at all, doesn't really have any sort of frame of reference, you'd probably use much different messaging for that person than you would for your friend who is also an artist. Does that make sense? So this is what we mean when we talk about, let's figure out who our audiences are. And to get started, I like to do that in 2 very simple groups, right? So now the first group, you always have to very clearly identify who you already communicate with, right? Who you're good at communicating with already. And those groups, right? You probably know off the top of your head, oh yeah, I have this group that, artist friends and, my family and this, people that also have studios in the shared studio space that I'm in, et cetera, right? Then on top of that, we need to think about, okay, so building upon that group, who are the people that I want to communicate with that maybe I'm not adequately reaching currently? Who are those future audiences? Who are those future segments, to use a marketing word? And we'll do a little bit of an activity on this in a hot second. But this is the first question: who are you trying to reach? Once you have this sort of fundamental, then we can start to build upon creating these relevant communications. So with each communication, we have to establish targeting. So that means identifying who the communication is going to, what messaging you're using, so what words you're going to use to talk to that particular group, and then what is the desired outcome from that communication. If you've ever sent out an email or a Facebook post or whatever it might be, and just kind of said, oh, well, I'll just put this out there. This will be fun or nice or interesting, right? Without having a clear outcome, right? There's a little bit missing there. When you have an outcome that you've identified for each one of your communications, that's going to help you with the messaging and with the targeting. Let's say you've got an art opening coming up and you want to invite people to it. Your outcome is having people attend, right? So that's going to guide the messaging. Because you want people to attend, probably within the messaging, you're going to include the date, the time, the location, right? And for the when you take one step back from that and think about, well, which group am I sending this to? Who am I talking to? Then that's going to guide the rest of your messaging, right? How you're going to speak about that art opening to get them to attend, to make it relevant and to make it interesting. The big thing here, and we talked about jargon giraffe, right, is that for most of our target audiences, we have to be really careful about using jargon. Sometimes we use jargon and we don't even realize it's jargon because it is just so integral to whatever it is we're talking about. And I have a couple of examples. This is I'm on a war against jargon here. I've been on this crusade for many years. I'm not going to give it up. In the arts, we have an insane amount of jargon, no matter what the discipline is, right? Because we just have certain words that we use to describe certain things. I think I mentioned I come from the opera world. Drew mentioned he comes from the orchestra world originally. Lots of jargon there, right? Tons. Like both of us, overture. If you've been to an orchestra concert or been to an opera and you understand what an overture is, great. But there's a lot of people out there who, if you say the word overture, they have absolutely no idea what that means. Right? In talking about how we communicate, I always like to put this little example up. Yes, Andrew, yes, Masterworks, yes. Because this is art related, and I should tell you, I use this example no matter what the discipline is when I speak to arts folks, because it's accurate. And in every discipline, there's a version of this. Like in the music, like classical music world, like the equivalent of this is like program notes, right? This just happens to be a wall label, which means it's smaller and easier to fit on a slide in a presentation. So your artists, you're hip to what this painting is. I don't have to explain to what the persistence of memory, Dali's persistence of memory is. If you look at the top wall label, this is like the regular wall label, right? And you just read that description. It's very artsy, right? Oh, and I should say, full transparency here, my mom is an art historian. That's what her degree is in. She also is a painter. She did that. So I like to think that I have a knowledge of art, right? And I love museums and all of this stuff. So everything I'm saying, I say lovingly. But the top one, the top wall label is sort of what you would expect at a museum for a wall label. It's got flowery language. It's got, fancy words that they're using, right? This second wall label below it is labeled for kids, which right there, I take issue with that, right? Because that's making a really big assumption, right? It's labeled for kids. Oops, sorry. But really, the only difference is that, and the bottom of this, like the last sentence is cut off here, sorry. But really, the difference is that the one on the bottom is just using regular language. So by stating number one, and I appreciate this museum's effort, I really do. But by stating that the bottom one is for kids, right, they're kind of making an assumption and a little bit of a swipe at the same time, because what if an adult is reading this and saying, oh, I like that one better, but supposedly it's for kids. Oh, well, I guess I'm stupid because I don't really know anything about this, because the one that says for kids is better. So But the one in the bottom here, using just kind of regular language, talking about the painting, talking about the artists, you actually learn something. If you read right before it's cut off there, it's saying that, you know, Dali was a member of a group of artists called the Surrealists. That's useful information for anyone. You know, some people who maybe attend or go to a museum with relative frequency could not necessarily know that Dali was a surrealist, right? Using regular language to communicate with a particular audience, right, or different language, doesn't always mean that we are dumbing things down, or that, you know, we are speaking in a way that is, you know, assuming that someone isn't as, you know, learned as another group. It's simply communicating it in the way that is going to be most compelling and most easily accessible, right, to that particular group. I have one more example. So that was sort of the flowery language example. Now I have one more example, which is from the ballet world, but it's still all the same thing, right? About a particular word itself. So Ballet Austin, I don't know, is anybody here, because I can see those of you who have your cameras on. Is anybody here a ballet fan? You've been to the ballet, like Nutcracker? No? Oh man, you gotta go. The ballet is super awesome. I started out life training to be a professional ballet dancer. It is so cool, right? Anyway, so good, then this will be perfect. So Ballet Austin, they got a grant, a big grant, to figure out and to learn more about their patron journey, right? So specifically, oh, thanks to those of you chatting in that you love the ballet, yes. Specifically, they wanted to know why people, or what the sort of route of people that came into the company, where their like first experience was the Nutcracker, right? So the Nutcracker has a lot of, you know, just universal appeal. You know, maybe you never go to the ballet, but you've seen the Nutcracker once, or you've brought kids or grandkids or whoever to the Nutcracker. So people who came in through the Nutcracker, you know, what happens to them next, but kind of specifically why they weren't making it to their mixed rep productions. So they wanted to figure this out. So they did a lot of really, really cool. If you want to know more about this, again, if you're super nerdy like me, you can Google Ballet Austin Wallace Foundation and you can find this, or probably as I'm talking, Drew McManus will be Googling that and then he will put the link there. I can see him doing it already. And the results are all available online, no email required. So they did a whole study about the journey of this audience and why they didn't make it to their mixed rep productions. They found a lot of really cool things, but the nugget that I want to share with you is that it was the way that the company was communicating about those mixed rep productions that created a barrier. It wasn't that the people that came to see Nutcracker weren't interested in other ballet productions. It was how they communicated. Specifically, the term mixed rep or mixed repertoire, which is the very term in ballet that is used to describe that particular thing. And for those of you who aren't dance or ballet people, mixed repertoire is a show where it's not one long like story ballet like Sleeping Beauty, let's say, you know, where the entire ballet is this one telling of this one story. A mixed repertoire show is you might have 2, 3, or 4 smaller pieces all on the same program. That one phrase, which is the exact phrase in the dance world that describes that particular type of performance, was creating the barrier. So, and there's other ways that you can say that, right? I just described it, you know, 4 smaller pieces on the same program or 4 shorter ballets on the same program, right? So they were unknowingly creating this barrier through how they were communicating and their use of jargon that they were so close to didn't even really realize that it was jargon, right? But it is. All right, and yes, I see Drew has put the link there. Very, very cool data if you're interested in that, in learning more about arts patrons and what they, what their preferences are and sort of how they move through. All right, so before we make it kind of to the end of this little section here, talking about, okay, so we need to have these target audiences. We need to achieve this relevance, right? How are we going to do that? How are you going to sort of break up and group these sort of buckets of people that you're going to use to communicate? I think I'm going to offer a way to do that, to sort of get started. And again, everything, you have to do things your own way. If you have a particular method that you've been using that, works, or a particular group that you've already identified that, is not necessarily within this way, that's totally fine. If you're doing something right now that's working really well, keep doing that. My suggestion is to look at your target audiences, the people that you're trying to reach, by level of engagement. I've used examples thus far of, people who might be fellow artists or friends or, a next door neighbor. It all kind of comes back to how engaged are people with what you do and with the arts. How engaged are they? A higher level of engagement probably means more of a knowledge of the vocabulary. You can use jargon with people who have more of that knowledge, right? Because they'll understand what that jargon is. People who have a lower level of engagement probably will need to have messaging that's a little bit clearer, using more quote unquote regular terminology. So I just have, this is totally a suggestion, but you could look at it to get started as looking at sort of 3 engagement levels, right? Your high engagement folks, people with a high level of knowledge, more medium. So people that maybe have interacted with you before, have attended something before, maybe they're on your email list. So they've received communications before, and then maybe lower levels of engagement, like, people who just are on social media, maybe they like things occasionally, but you don't really have a level of knowledge of kind of who they are and what their background is. So with that in mind, we have an activity. Is everyone ready for an activity? I can see everyone's ready for it. Now, this is going to be super high tech. If you have with you a piece of paper and a writing implement, or so retro, I know, right? Or of course, if you have a screen of some sort where you could type, if you would get that out and just sort of, we're going to take maybe a couple minutes, think about 3 groups of people, 3 audiences that you want to communicate with. And within those 3 audiences, think of 3 items that would be of the most interest to them, right? You can think about it too in a way of, if you want to think about a hypothetical event coming up and you're communicating with these 3 audiences, or, it can just be sort of general example, and then I'll stop talking and let you think, or you could just mute me. It would be savage, but totally fine. You could just say, okay, well, one of my audience is my family, and the thing that they're going to be interested in is, well, the fact that it's like my art, right? Because they're my family, and, XYZ, versus, I want to try to communicate with a potential collector. These are the things that are going to be the most of interest to someone that might purchase my work, etc. Okay, I'll stop talking now for like a minute. Now that you've got that, or hopefully at least a couple audiences, right? The purpose of doing that is to kind of get your mindset in this kind of communications, messaging, relevant sort of zone so that we can carry that through the rest of the workshop today. And out of this, we've come to our first Q&A break. And because we're running a little bit ahead of our schedule that we were imposing upon ourselves, we've got plenty of time for Q&A. So I'd like to just open up the floor. If you have a question, please feel free to unmute yourself, or you can type it in the chat if you'd prefer to do that. Don't be shy. I keep forgetting it's still early for you all on that coast. I'm sitting in Cleveland where there's snow outside. What's the weather look like for you all? I can see a lot of sun in the background. Those sun, what is that?
We do have one question in chat now.
Oh, good. Oh, how to grow an email list. We're going to talk about email a little bit later. Yep. We will have a whole set. Email is one of my favorite things. We're going to have a whole section on that. So we'll definitely talk about that. But interesting that you, so I'm going to take this opportunity to tie that back to what we were just saying. Your email list, right? Growing an email list, it's only as good as the engagement of that email list. And that engagement is going to come from relevant messaging sent to that email list.
I'm looking right at those slides now.
I know everyone's now going to be waiting with bated breath until we get there. Is this the email section?
Hey, Ceci, so as I thought about the audiences that I think we at the Arts Commission of Laguna Beach are particularly interested in, first is community. So our local community, those who actually live in town, that is always a main focus for us. The second would be visitors, but visitors who want to spend more than just a quick day trip to the beach. People who want to stay at our hotels, go to our restaurants, our galleries, participate in events. People who spend a little bit of money in town. And the last and really important audience is the younger audience. So, college and down. And that is connected directly to Laguna College of Art and Design and the cadre of students who live in and participate in the programming there. So I think, all of those things and wanting to develop and keep alive the younger audience that will then become the more mature audience as time goes by. So I think those are, clearly how our festivals, our galleries, our museum, our cultural life and all of the service providers, the restaurants, et cetera, will be prosperous in the long term. So I think those are our three major audiences.
And I swear, everybody, Adam is not a plant. We just met right before this, but he's bringing up things that then I have more words to say about. And this is not rehearsed, I promise. So you mentioned, your first one that you mentioned is the community, right? Which of course, because of the nature of what you do. So you, and most organizations are gonna have, you might have sub-segments within, or sub-audiences within an audience, right?
Yes.
Because community is so big, you kind of have to break that down into some subgroups in there. One of the things that I say frequently is, one of my most hated terms as it applies to sort of marketing or communications is general public. Because, in the arts and as artists, we use it, well, yes, what I do would be absolutely enjoyable or interesting to everyone, right? Well, I'm trying to reach the general public, but no one, whether you're coming at it from an organizational side or an independent artist, even if you're a, multi-million dollar, billion-dollar company, no one has enough time, energy, money to adequately target a group as large and nondescript as the general public. Even if, let's say, you're like Zappos.com or something, right? They've got a marketing department of I don't even know how many, right? And they're segmenting everything 9 ways to Sunday, right? When you look at a pair of shoes on Zappos, you receive an email after leaving them in your cart with that pair of shoes plus like 4 other pairs of shoes just like them, right? So they're segmenting way down, right, to the individual level. This is how Zappos gets all of my money, right?
I knew you'd say that.
Yeah, this is how Zappos and J. Crew, this is how they do it. So when we think about sort of looking at our community and making those communications relevant, figuring out those subgroups are also really helpful and important.
And that is obviously a thing that we've spent some time thinking about, and it's not been easy to diversify our foci. I mean, it's hard to figure out how to pinpoint those communications effectively, given a limited budget and limited staff. So I'll be interested in hearing more about that as we go forward. And clearly, one of those most important parts of the community segment is the artists who both live in town and come to Laguna Beach to make this town be the extraordinary place it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, excellent. Yeah, we have a convo in the chat with Jennifer. Hi, Jennifer. Let's see here. Sorry, I have to scroll back up here. Okay, so Jennifer from an arts organization with, I hope everyone can see the chat. 3 main audiences: parents, students, and donors. So funding related groups. So you've exactly hit it on the head, Jennifer, is that, those certain groups have different concerns, and, not only talking to them about those specific things that they're concerned with. So parents and students are going to have one concern, donors are going to want to hear other information, how their money is being used, etc. Yeah, that's all really great. I always give an example too about how we talked about, the example with the 2 wall labels, one for adults and one for children. Sometimes it's just really small things that you can identify as being something that would be a concern or of interest to a particular audience, that once you kind of put yourself in their shoes, it might be small to us, but to them, it's something really, really relevant. For example, this is my example I always give for this because I think it's the best one. So I mentioned I come from the opera world. I used to do marketing at an opera company, and every year we had a children's performance. So it was at the big theater. It was with professional artists, our orchestra, everything. You got sold a ticket and you go have the complete theater opera experience, right? It was shortened down. So not like a 3-hour opera. It was shortened down to like 90 minutes for kids. But one of the things that we found that we got asked a lot about, and our box office got asked a lot about, was about stroller parking. Could the parents bring a stroller into the theater? Which, to be honest, I had never thought about that would be a concern. And actually, it was pretty embarrassing because I had kids at that time. And I also was lugging a stroller around everywhere with me. But I didn't think about that because I was so close to it. I knew, yeah, sure, you can bring the stroller into the theater. But not everyone knew that. So we started putting that, a little line about how that it was perfectly okay to bring strollers, into the theater, because that was going to be a barrier, right? If this parent was bringing 3 kids, 2 of which were small enough to be in a stroller, the act of being able to push the stroller into the theater was really big, and that removed a barrier for them to attend. And that's such a small little thing. Okay. Are we good with that section? Everyone good? I noticed there's convo in the chat about websites. Drew is going to regale us about websites. So first we're going to take a little break. Just if anybody needs to take a bio break or get another cup of coffee or anything like that, we're going to take about a 5-minute break, and then we will come back. Does that sound good to everyone?
Absolutely.
Yes? Awesome. See you in 5 minutes.